Hi, everyone. I'm Maura Regan, President of Licensing International, the premier trade association for the global brand licensing industry. And I'm here today with two wonderful colleagues, Madeline Di Nonno, President and CEO of Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media Studies, and Shreyasi Jha, who is with Unicef. And Shreyasi is Senior Gender Advisor at Unicef. And they both have amazing pedigrees, and I would encourage you to take a look at the body of work that they both produced related to this subject specifically, but also adjacent industries as well. We're here with you today on behalf of the Toy Association to really talk about a program that is critically important to advancing all of our businesses, which is diversity and inclusion in the toy industry specifically, as well as related industries. Now, we want to talk a lot about why children need diverse role models, but I first also want to talk about a body of work that was published and produced by UNICEF in conjunction with LEGO Foundation, as well as the Geena Davis Institute. We know how important role models are for children, and that takes its form and shape in everything from marketing to the toys they play with, to all the messages that we surround them. And so this playbook that was developed was specifically for professionals in the toy industry and related marketing industry to provide a roadmap to create products and marketing campaigns and packaging that is dedicated to providing positive role models for children of all ages. And so we'll talk a little bit about this. But let me first just jump into a question that can really just kick us off in this conversation, which is over to Shreyasi. If you could tell us a little bit from your perspective why you felt it was so important for UNICEF to engage with business leaders on this issue, and really what sparked the conversation with UNICEF and the LEGO Group to create the playbook.
Thanks so much, Maura, and it's I'm delighted to be on a panel again with Madeline and you, and definitely in this particular forum of the Toy Fair. So to your question, we in UNICEF for the last few years have been really trying to unpack how children actually learn their different identities. And, coming from the gender space, one of the most important identities that we wanted to focus on was really looking at, how do children learn about their gender identities early on in their life. So there's a vast body of literature that has been done, some of it by UNICEF, also by other partners, right, that tries to identify, what are the ways children get socialized, what are these agents of socialization, who plays an important role at what age in their life. So what we found was that, when you look at the very early, 0 to 5 years of their lives, the most important influences in a child's life are parents. And then as you get older, other agents start playing a very important role. So friends, peers, media, and one of the most important agents to which children get socialized is, of course, how they play. And that's when we started thinking about, okay, so since toys play such an important role, right? We always at UNICEF say, playing is actually not just playing, it's actually learning. That's how children learn. And it's such an important channel through which children are learning about themselves and their environment and where they are located. That's how they learn to engage with the world, right? And it's such a huge developmental component of their lives. So we wanted to explore opportunities where we could have the most impact, working with children, most impact for children, trying to influence the process through which we could create, positive gender norms, and really start to question some of the stereotypes that we see around gender in toys and the ways in which children, play at different stages of their life. UNICEF has a long-standing partnership with the LEGO Group in many different areas, and through that we started having a conversation with them around the issue of diversity and inclusion. And luckily for us, I think we were both at the same point in our journey, and we started talking about really unpacking what does diversity and inclusion mean for children, what does it mean for the toy industry, and coming, an offshoot of that partnership was this playbook. And what this playbook does is actually, we start off with defining what are the different types of identity, the most important forms. Of course, there's so many different multiple ways in which we can look at identity, but what are the most important ones? Defining them and then trying to really break it down for companies. How do you actually go about addressing them? Why is it important to address this issue of stereotypes? What are the channels through which we can create stereotypes for children? And then how do you actually go about addressing them?
And it really is fascinating. I think what you've captured is the power of toys and the packaging, the marketing to really connect with children and their caregivers. And Madeline, sort of on that, where do you really see happening today around specifically around discrimination and around role models and stereotyping and the work that you're doing as
just to give everyone an example of how the UNICEF Playbook has played out in our research with Lego. One of the things Shreyasi said is that the most critical influencer for children, especially 0 to 5, are parents. And what we found, and we also have the pleasure and privilege of working with not only UNICEF but Lego, is what we found out is that, parents and society are holding kids back. And we interviewed nearly 7,000 parents in multiple countries, and we found that the parents were 5 times more likely to encourage their girls to engage in activities like dancing and cooking, where they were 4 times more likely to encourage their boys into STEM, into Lego play, into gaming. And so when you think about awareness, which is also a pillar of the UNICEF playbook, when we asked parents to imagine, what does a scientist look like? They were 6 times more likely to say it was a male. And when we said, what does an engineer look like? It was 8 times more likely. So, when you think about, that awareness that not only relates to parents, but it's also going to relate to business leaders who are also, parents. But when we came to the kids themselves, we were really heartened to see that, girls were 82% more likely to say, yeah, I want to play football and I'm okay if boys do ballet. So, the children are ready, particularly the girls are ready, and we just need the parents and society to be aware of that imprint and to also follow that through the steps that is indicated, in the playbook, for industry.
One of the things that I hear, licensing, and by the way, 30% of toys are licensed. So we also understand, and licensed toys generally come to that place from a story behind it, a narrative. And so we don't take lightly the opportunity that we have as a business community to make positive impact on the lives of children, and that it's an opportunity as well as a responsibility. And so one of the things that I found particularly gratifying about this playbook, and if you guys can talk a little bit more about how it came to be, is that, we often hear no one's going to argue with what any of us are saying, but it's just, okay, that's all well and good, but how do I make it happen? And the challenges of really taking all of this and putting it into practice. And so creating the toys and the play patterns and the packaging around these issues. I mean, what has been your experience from the actual developers? And as you're offering them a solution, it doesn't mean that it goes away. It's still a challenge. But I don't know if you've heard anything further on any of this.
So from our side, we've recently, we've just launched it. So it's just been a few months on the shelf, this particular playbook. But I think so far what we are hearing is that people have found this to be very practical. And the model that we have talked about is, as I think, Maura, as you rightly pointed out, it is really moving beyond making the case for why we need to work on this, right? I think that most companies, most toy companies, realize that there is a need. I think there is enough of noise around it now. I think enough customers are aware. Consumers want this, they're aware of it, and they want to work on it. I think a lot of the time, but they don't know how to make the next step, right? So you can see that in so many initiatives that you see around going on, where people are trying to do something. Sometimes they don't get it right. Sometimes they are on message. Sometimes they're not on message. But what this playbook does, and I think this is why it's been, we've had such positive feedback, is that it's very practical in terms of laying out how do you do it. And then the other thing that I think that is very kind of practical about this is recognizing that it's a stepwise process. You're not going to go from a place where you were completely blind, where you were designing your toys and you were making your toys with the assumption that girls and boys are starting from different places and let's just cater to them in their two neat little boxes, right? You're not going to go from that point to the point where you are now trying to be transformational and promoting positive roles for girls and trying to really get girls and boys on the same page. You're not going to go to from 0 to 10 in 1 year. I think it is really recognizing that this is part of a journey, and as Madeline said, one of the first steps is to really do that internal assessment and say, okay, where are we right now? Maybe it's possible that in one particular line you're doing excellently, so you could have one line within your broader company that is extremely progressive, that's actually doing really great on messaging and content and design. But you could have the same company making something else which is really not meeting the benchmarks. So I think that's why this, we need to take this really kind of a practical approach, but again, coming from the perspective that we have the right interests of children and we're trying to promote positive messages for kids.
And I think what's interesting is, and looking over to Madeline, is that if we think about the great work that the Geena Davis Institute in Media Studies has been doing for more than 20 years, really has been leading the charge on this and how it's evolved. And I think your catchphrase may still be, if she can see it, she can be it. And it really is so true. But I think so much of the work that the Institute is doing today is working on these kinds of playbooks and things that we worked on with you as well, but also educating industry leaders and how important from a top down and a bottom up throughout the ranks. And I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that work that you've been doing, Madeline, as well, with industry leaders about educating and putting in place best practices throughout their organizations.
Absolutely. And for those of you out in Toyland who may not know, we've had the privilege of being partners with Maura and Maria and Licensing International for quite a few years. And when you look at the awareness part of the playbook, I really want to applaud you for being extremely progressive in providing a blueprint and resources for your members. And what was great is to look at the progress that we made even in 1 year. So when we talk about awareness, accountability, and measuring, it's one thing to just have a mission statement. It's another thing to put some actions in place. And what we found is when we surveyed your members, we found 41% of the organizations overall instituted a diversity, equity, inclusion program, and that was up 30% from 2020. And that's remarkable considering we're in the midst of COVID, where everything, the world is exploding around us. And then on top of that, when we asked your members, well, what type of diversity, equity program do you have? We found that 34% said, yes, we do have training. Yes, we do have programs. And that was up 21% from 2020. So that was really remarkable. And despite COVID, 15% budgeted financial support, which was up 10% from 2020. So that was really substantial. And then in terms of recruitment efforts, which we know this is the great migration and resignation, right? Everyone's quitting their jobs. We found that organizations with specific diversity, equity, and inclusion recruitment efforts were up 6%. So I think, what we have done, with you, with industry leaders, has been, a great blueprint. And then overall, in terms of the other thing that Shreyasi mentioned is what's the measurement and what's the creative process that complements your particular business and your particular culture. And at the Institute, we have different auditing measurements that we have used, and we have measurements that we can examine, advertising, we can examine packaging, we can examine more long form content, because as you said, 30% of toys are licensed. So we do a lot of script consulting, which then that translates to licensed merchandise. So there's a lot of other tools that the Institute offers, which falls into that blueprint of what Shreyasi was saying in terms of embedding it in the creative process. So it becomes systemic.
I think that's, as we have gone through this whole process, I mean, I think what the real takeaway for all of us is that everyone is committed to this. There's a clear business imperative for that. It's really, how do you create the tools to allow your teams to be able to execute against your strategy? And something that we've been saying early on, which is that what gets measured gets done. And when people are held accountable, things get done. And the recognition that these programs need to be funded. There needs to be resources put against creating these kinds of tools to allow us as an industry to create toys and related marketing campaigns that advance diversity and inclusion. So I think those are really the three pillars going forward, is that to create the tools and make them fully available. And so that's why this toolkit from LEGO and Unicef is freely available, which is wonderful, for companies, organizations from the top down to fund internally the resources to allow their teams to address diversity and inclusion at all levels, through all ranks, internally as well as externally with the products they're creating, and to measure activity and what we're doing, because again, as we like to say, what gets measured gets done. So I think those are real strong takeaways for all of us today around how we can further advance. And as Madeline mentioned, we have researched as an industry where we started a year after where we are, and then we're going into the next year, so 2 years after starting, again, to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable, and then of course, importantly, celebrating our successes. But I wanted just to ask both Shreyasi and Madeline, sort of if they, sort of have some takeaways for folks who are tuning into this today, who are representing companies big and small and everything in between, and who want to commit to creating the best products and products that really engender all these positive qualities for children everywhere. Some real key takeaways. So Shreyasi, I don't know if there's a takeaway for you for the toy designers out there and marketeers.
Sure, and I think, Maura, I'm going to pick a word that you said, which is ones who are truly committed. And I think, it's great to see companies coming out with mission statements that reflect their values and and what they stand for. In fact, whenever we have this conversation with potential partners, the first question that always comes to that we always like to raise is that, are you truly committed? I mean, are you truly thinking about making transformational shifts in the way you function? And I think that's it. If you are truly committed, then mission statement is great. That will reflect what your values are. But in order to live those values, there has to be a commitment to making those kind of shifts in the way you work internally and also what you're producing, right? So looking at the teams, as you said, who's involved in the process, who's making, having the diversity both within your workforce and in your creative teams and all of that, and then holding yourself accountable, setting those benchmarks for yourself. So I would just encourage companies to go out there, take a look at the playbook. There's lots of really helpful examples from other, from the toy industry, but also from other industries. So take a look at that and download it. It's available for free. and use it. I mean, that's the number one thing. Use it. This was really meant for something that would benefit the industry and then ultimately benefit children.
Terrific, thank you. Madeline, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, there's a number of pathways and buckets, so to speak. So there's the internal interworkings, which Shreyasi was mentioning in terms of your teams, the composition of your teams, your vendors, how are you sourcing creative, where are they coming from? Are you building a pipeline of diverse and inclusive, creatives and executives? That's one pathway. The other is looking at connection between cross-pollination. So for example, you have your product development team, and then you have the marketing and packaging team, you have a social media team, and it's really important, especially around product development, product launch, that they all come back together and that they review all of those components and those pieces to make sure that it's a cohesive story in terms of reflecting and infusing diversity, equity, inclusion. And those entities don't always come together in that way, in that overarching review. And it's really important that you can have interventions at all of those steps, from creative all the way through to distribution, and then even having a conversation where there is brick and mortar, or however your retail partner is, to understand, well, how is my product being represented? How is it being promoted by my distribution partner? Because that's also very important, because that's the front line to the consumer.
Now that makes perfect sense, and you've really sort of captured the ecosystem that goes into all of this. And it's not just, you can't just really be off on your own, but it really, everyone has to sort of join hands in all of this at every step of the way, to making sure that what you bring to retail and how that experience is brought to the consumer is reflective of the great products that you've actually created. So it all goes hand in glove. And I also think that it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And I think sometimes some of the things that we've also heard, and that was the impetus certainly for the Playbook and the toolkit that the Geena Davis Institute of Media Studies created for Licensing International, was to really sort of demystify what it takes to really start on this journey. And no one's saying that it's easy or that's one and done, but we're all used to product development is not easy, or creating a TV series. None of this is easy stuff anyway. And so, but this demystifies what it takes in many ways, and how there are so many resources for all of you out there who are trying to do the right thing to create these kinds of products and experiences. So these are resources that are available. It is not an academic exercise, as you heard Shreyasi say, and certainly Madeline as well. We are creating tools that we expect and we want people to use. And so we update these. We want to hear from people what's working, what's not working, but it's a place to start. And we really do encourage all of you who are committed to making great products for children around the world, as they all deserve, to take a look at these resources and come back to us with any questions, because we're open for that. Again, this is a journey for all of us, and it's ever evolving and ever changing. And we do know that children have the capacity to understand these kinds of things in a very intuitive way. So it doesn't have to be something that you're scared of, because children intuitively love, and they don't come out with any kind of biases. So the more that we can provide them with the tools to keep them on that path, the better. So you're in great hands with both Shreyasi Jha from Unicef and Madeline Di Nonno with the Geena Davis Institute of Media Studies. So thank you all for joining us today, and we wish we could see you in person, but hopefully soon. But in the meantime, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.